Hey guys, and welcome to Respect Your Intellect. I'm John, and in this video, instead of answering Flat Earth questions and addressing its problems as usual, we'll be switching the tables around and we will be asking Flat Earthers some questions. Let's get started! Okay, so usually we're the ones addressing the problems with Flat Earthers' fantasy world. Today we'll be asking a series of questions that the globe model has had perfect answers to for hundreds of years, and we'll see if Flat Earthers can answer these questions as clearly, concisely, flawlessly, and elegantly as science can. Here are the challenge rules. 1. No calling fake or lies, since you can experience all of these for yourself. 2. No mention of religion. This is only about the shape of the Earth. 3. Hearsay is not considered evidence. Quotes, newspapers, articles, books, etc. 4. All questions must be answered. Anything less is regression. And 5. The answers must be more complete than what the globe model offers because, again, anything less is also regression. Those are the same standards given to anybody else with a claim throughout history, so you're not being held to a higher standard by any means. Let's also keep in mind that the Flat Earth model does not only make claims about the shape of the Earth. The Earth being flat is the foundation for the claim, but it also claims that the Sun and Moon are only 3,000 to 5,000 miles away, that the stars are just lights on the dome, that gravity doesn't exist, and that Antarctica is not a continent but rather an impenetrable wall of ice guarded by military. The Flat Earth argument extends well beyond just the shape of the Earth. It extends to all things we can observe from the Earth that don't make sense on a plane. Then it also extends to the forces we experience like gravity that can't be explained on a flat Earth. So don't start dismissing questions because they're not about the shape of the Earth. The implications of your model extend to a multitude of other objects and forces that you have to be able to explain better than what we already know. Okay, enough of the introduction, let's start. Question 20. Why has the ice wall never been seen? Even if you subscribe to the ridiculous idea that it's being patrolled by military from all countries working together, as if they can get along well enough for that, then surely a simple telescope on a clear day would be enough to see it without actually needing to go there yourself. On the Flat Earth map, the southernmost parts of South America, South Africa, and Australia should be the closest and least obstructed. Scientific answer? The ice wall doesn't exist. Antarctica is a continent like the others. At the south pole of the planet, it just has more ice because it's cold there. What's the Flat Earth explanation? Question 19. Why do boats disappear bottom first? Flat Earthers like to use videos or pictures of boats that are near the horizon but never past it. I imagine that's because they can't explain it without using terms they don't really understand like refraction and atmospheric lensing, which don't really help with their explanations anyway. But take a look at these. Oh, and if you want to see the full videos that are referenced here, all the links will be in the description. In this one, the ship is not very big, so we'll be able to see it go past the horizon, then reach the vanishing point before being completely below the horizon. Here we have the boat just about on the horizon. Here we have the boat past the horizon. And here we have the boat reaching the vanishing point before being completely below the horizon because it's a pretty small boat. Now in this one, we're looking at the Golden Princess, which is a huge cruise ship. The guy films a completely uncut version of 1 hour showing the Golden Princess going below the horizon, and it's big enough that it doesn't reach the vanishing point before being completely below the horizon. Keep in mind that this ship has a height of 177 feet, so around 150 feet above the waterline, which is almost as high as the Niagara Falls, so it's very, very tall. As if it wasn't enough that he filmed this so clearly, once the ship is about half below the horizon, he also goes up a hill further back that gives him about 40 feet more elevation compared to where he was on the beach. As he does that, he shows that the cruise ship is now almost fully visible again, even if he moved away from it. And that's what we expect to see from a spherical Earth. See his video for the full uncut version. Scientific answer? Ships always follow the curvature of the Earth and end up below the horizon. Depending on the ship's size and the zoom on your lens, it might reach the vanishing point before being completely below the horizon. But if the ship is big enough, like the cruise ship, you'll see it go below the horizon well before it reaches the vanishing point. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 18. How are lunar eclipses possible and always circular? This one is a pretty simple question. How are lunar eclipses possible if both the sun and the moon are the only two things orbiting above us? In your flat Earth model, there are also claims that the moon is its own light source. If that were the case, how could a shadow even be cast on it? Scientific answer: the Earth is a sphere that sometimes passes between the sun and the moon to cast a shadow on the moon. Spheres are the only shape to always cast a circular shadow. Also, the moon is not a light source. It just has a reflective curved surface that sends some of the light it receives back down to us. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 17. How is Earth's magnetic field generated? Earth's magnetic field is what prevents our atmosphere from being stripped away by the charged particles we receive from the sun. Without it, the solar winds would strip away our ozone layer, which protects us from the sun's harmful ultraviolet radiation. Scientific answer: Earth's core is composed of very hot iron that can't turn liquid due to the extreme force of gravity there. However, the outer core is liquid iron. As the iron warms and cools, it rises and sinks, causing convection currents. The Earth's spin also contributes to the swirling of matter in the outer core. The motion of these convection currents of molten iron generates electric currents. These electric currents are the source for our magnetic field. Science hasn't confirmed this with absolute certainty yet, but our current evidence is pointing strongly in that direction, so although our degree of certainty is not perfect yet, it's still pretty good. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 16. What keeps the sun and the moon from simply falling to Earth? If the sun and moon are just hovering above the clouds a few thousand miles, what's the force that keeps them afloat there? Scientific answer: the sun and moon are not just above us. The moon orbits the Earth at 384,400 kilometers, and we both orbit the sun at 149.6 million kilometers from it. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 15. What powers the light emanating from the sun, the moon, and the stars? In order for things to emit light, there needs to be a reaction that excites the atoms. As the electrons of an atom jump to a higher orbit, the atom holds more energy. When it loses this energy by having the electron jump back to a lower orbit, the atom emits a photon, which is the fundamental particle of light. This process is known as the emission of light. So where does the luminosity from the sun, moon, and stars come from in your flat Earth model, and how is it self-sustaining? Scientific answer: the sun's luminosity is caused by nuclear fusion, where atoms are smashed together under the tremendous pressure of gravity. This fusion creates energy that makes its way back up to the surface and is emitted as light and heat consistently. For the moon, it looks bright because it's reflective, and as it receives rays from the sun, it bounces some of them back toward us. The sun rays that hit the moon are all nearly parallel too, because the distance is so huge, so it also explains why we don't just have one glare of reflection as if you had shined a flashlight on a bowling ball from up close. As far as stars go, their luminosity is caused by the same process as our sun in general, because our sun is just another star. Some stars, like neutron stars, also emit light due to nuclear decay instead of nuclear fusion. Also, the temperature of the star determines the color of light they emit. Cooler stars emit red light, slightly warmer stars emit orange light, even warmer stars emit yellow to white light like our sun, and the hottest stars emit blue light. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 14. If Earth is accelerating instead of gravity, where's the energy coming from? We don't feel speed, we feel acceleration, and acceleration requires a force to act on the object. Think about when you're driving on the highway and your back is not constantly being pushed against your seat. Other than bumps in the road and visual cues, it's as if you're motionless, if your speed is constant. If it was true that the Earth was always accelerating upwards to keep us on the ground, this energy for a constant acceleration must come from somewhere, and the sun and moon and other stars would all have to follow the same rules to avoid colliding with us. Scientific answer: The Earth keeps us on the ground due to the gravity it generates. At any point in time, the entire Earth's mass is trying to pull us down to its center. It's just that the ground gets in the way. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 13. How do you explain Saturn's shape through a telescope? If you look through a telescope, you can clearly see the ring going behind Saturn and the moons orbiting in front and behind Saturn. If you take multiple shots and stack them together to get an even higher quality picture, it's even clearer. Scientific answer? Saturn is spherical like all other planets, and its ring and moons just pass behind it from our point of view, very normally. There's really not much else to explain here. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 12. How could two flat earthers agree on the sun's current altitude without lying to each other? The west coast of the US, which is in Pacific time, will be 3 hours earlier than the east coast, which is Eastern time. Even a simple sunrise or sunset across the horizon couldn't possibly happen at different times on a flat plane. So how could it be that the west coast would see the sunrise across the horizon at a very low altitude at around 6 a.m., while the person on the east coast would see it already halfway up in the sky at 9 a.m.? Answering perspective here is wrong because it brings up more questions than it answers. More on that in the next question. Scientific answer? They would not be able to agree. They would have to lie to each other, and it would act as further evidence that the Earth is a sphere. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 11. Why doesn't the sun grow and shrink during the day? The main flat Earth argument for day and night is that the sun reaches the vanishing point from your perspective, which makes no sense whatsoever, because even using your own distances, it would have to be much further than the entire world to stop seeing the sun. Yet, it's still overhead for someone just a few time zones away. And if the sun did in fact reach the vanishing point, it would be growing in size from morning to noon, then shrinking in size until it disappears from view as it moves away from you and reaches the vanishing point. The sun would only be its full size at noon if perspective was the cause. So why does the sun not change size as the day progresses? And don't be fooled by camera trickery that emphasizes the glare and just gives an illusion of shrinkage as the sun is gradually hidden by the horizon. Scientific answer? The sun is 149.6 million kilometers away, and the Earth's radius is 6,371 kilometers. Between a sunrise or sunset and noon, the difference in distance to the sun for the observer is a negligible 0.004%, so the sun remains the same size from our perspective and simply crosses the horizon as the Earth rotates. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 10. How do you explain sunsets where half of the sun is visible? We all know of these beautiful sunsets where half of the sun is visible across the horizon. This is also observable by anyone near a body of water with a horizon in line with a sunrise or sunset. So how could the sun be that big and not nearly close to a vanishing point, but only be half visible across the horizon? Scientific answer? The sun is simply crossing the horizon as the Earth rotates, and the Earth itself is obstructing your line of sight to the sun from your position. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 9. How do you explain cruise ships and South Pole tour flights that regularly go to Antarctica? Isn't this supposed to be blocked by military in your model? Yet there are a lot of videos up of people either crossing Antarctica, flying over the South Pole, or visiting the edge on cruises. Isn't the South Pole non-existent in your model too? Scientific answer? They just travel there. There's nothing preventing it. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 8. Why is there a gradient in air pressure? The flat Earth model claims that we live under a dome in a pressurized system. If that were the case, then the air pressure would be the same near the top as it is near the ground. Altimeters on planes analyze the pressure of the air to determine the altitude of the aircraft, so it definitely does exist. You can even take trips to high mountains and experience it for yourself. And before you give the example of a vacuum chamber sucking the air into it, you need to know that vacuums don't actively suck the air. It's just the pressure equalizing and finding a balance very quickly with the weight of the atmosphere above us. So how would you explain the air pressure gradient, as well as the fact that the higher pressure near the ground doesn't escape into the lower pressure at the top? Scientific answer: atmospheric pressure is determined by the weight of the molecules above a certain altitude, due to the Earth's gravity pulling down on all molecules. So when you're closer to the ground, there's more atmosphere above you than below you. The weight of this atmosphere is what creates higher pressure near the ground, and why it's gradually decreasing with altitude, because there's less and less atmosphere above you. Oceans are the same way. The deeper you dive, the more pressure increases, because there's more and more water weight above you, weighing down on you and the water around you. To know more, you can look at how much pressure deep diving submarines have to hold up to. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 7. Why can't you see Kawakini from the peak of Mauna Kea? These two locations are only 303 miles apart, so surely on a flat Earth this would be entirely visible on a clear day, especially with the fact that you're 13,800 feet above sea level at the peak of Mauna Kea. If you doubt this, remember that there are instruments like telescopes that could help you see even further, so why can't you see it? Scientific answer: because the horizon is about 144 miles away. The curvature becomes too steep and the entire island is out of view even when you're almost 14,000 feet above sea level. Kawakini is actually hidden by about 16,800 feet, even with your high elevation taken into account. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 6. Why is the night sky completely different in each hemisphere? Depending on which hemisphere you're in, all constellations are different. Polaris can be seen from south of the equator, and the moon is upside down when comparing pictures taken from the northern and southern hemispheres. So why are there two different versions of the night sky and the moon, and why can't the North Star be seen at all from below the equator? Scientific answer: each hemisphere of our spherical planet is pointing in opposite directions. The Earth is always pulling us towards its center, so from the north and south poles, people are standing in opposite directions too, so they're watching the moon upside down from each other as well. It's also why the night sky is completely different, because the Earth itself obstructs the northern sky from the southern hemisphere and vice versa. It's also worth noting that telescopes can maintain a fix on stars through the floor and can be tracked through their crossing of the horizon as they come into view. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 5. How do you explain seasons and how they're inversed in each hemisphere? On December 21 or 22, the northern hemisphere begins winter and the southern hemisphere begins summer. On June 20 or 21, the northern hemisphere begins summer and the southern hemisphere begins winter. How do you explain that we experience seasons opposite of each other just from being on opposite sides of the equator? Based on your model, the sun shines from the North Pole to the imaginary south ice wall at any given time, so there should be no seasonal difference in the southern hemisphere if your model was accurate. Scientific answer: the Earth's axis of rotation is not perpendicular to our orbital plane around the sun. Instead, we're tilted 23.5 degrees relative to the orbital plane. This tilt doesn't change with our orbit, it's always pointing towards the same direction in space, which also explains why the North Star is always overhead at the North Pole. As we move around the sun, the northern hemisphere will receive more sunlight for half of the year, while the southern hemisphere will receive more sunlight during the other half. The half of the year that receives more sunlight is spring and summer, and the half that receives less sunlight is fall and winter. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 4. Why is the moon scarred with impact craters all over its surface? If you look at the surface of the moon with a telescope, you can see the amount of impact craters in great detail. There are also a lot of observers actively looking and recording impact flashes on the moon. How do you explain this scarred surface on the moon? What do you imagine the surface of the moon is even made of? Why are there any craters at all? Scientific answer: the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, and space debris hits it all the time. For us, the debris burns as it disintegrates with the friction in the air when entering Earth's atmosphere. However, on the moon, it just hits the surface without opposition and forms craters on impact, as well as an explosion that we can see as an impact flash. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 3. How is the direct Qantas Flight 27 from Sydney to Santiago, Chile possible in 12 hours? This flight boarded tens of thousands of passengers. Many people even recorded their route. If the flat earth model was accurate, then this flight would have two possibilities. Either it would go in a straight line and have to fly over both Americas, or it could try and respect real-world observations made on the flight and take that route to fake being on a globe. For the first option, no one has ever flown over the Americas to get to that destination, so that's clearly wrong. This leaves only one option. Planes take the long way. The circumference of the Earth we currently use to navigate accurately is 40,000 kilometers. If you draw a line from the North Pole to the South Wall, it's equivalent to half of the circumference we're already using, so 20,000 kilometers. Now this on the flat Earth map is only the radius, so if we calculate the circumference of flat Earth with a 20,000 kilometer radius, we get a circumference of 125,663 kilometers. So on the long way, you would have to circle around a bit less than half the world, so about 62,000 kilometers. This aircraft is the Boeing 747-400, and it has a maximum range of 14,200 kilometers, which is only about 1/5 of what would be required on a flat Earth. A flight this long would also take about 66 hours instead of the 12 hours we actually experience. Scientific answer? On a globe, it's a pretty straight line, and these locations are about 11,300 kilometers apart. Very simple. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 2. How can mountains cast shadows on clouds? In the flat Earth model, the sun is always above the clouds, even though there are many other things you can't explain. Regardless, it should be impossible for the sun to cast a shadow upwards in the flat Earth model. Yet, Mt Rainier is known for exactly that, regularly casting its shadow on the clouds during sunrise. Now take a quick look at these short clips.
There was no denying it. In a way, it's kind of in some ways funnier.
How do you explain this on a flat Earth? Scientific answer? The sun's rays originate from lower than the horizon. Then the straight path of the light skims just above the horizon and continues upwards to the mountain. The mountain then obstructs the light from continuing its upwards path and getting to the clouds behind it, resulting in a shadow on the clouds. What's the flat Earth explanation? Question 1. How can clouds be illuminated from below during sunrises and sunsets? In the flat Earth model, the sun is always overhead. How can it be possible that clouds are illuminated from below and still shady on top? Even if light bounced back from the surface to the underside of the cloud, there shouldn't be a way that the top of the cloud would remain shady. If you doubt that clouds block the light, you can experience the shading effect for yourself whenever it's a sunny day and a cloud passes between you and the sun. The result is that you'll be in shade because the cloud blocked the majority of the light from getting to you. And before you send your answer, make sure it also answers why mountains always receive sunlight from the top first. Just like the mountain, the sun's rays originate from lower than the horizon, then skims the top of the horizon in a straight line, and continues upwards to illuminate below the clouds. The cloud itself is dense enough to not let much light through, and keep the top of it in shade. What's the flat Earth explanation? If you're a flat earther, think about what made you get into it in the first place. Maybe it was pictures where you can't distinguish a curve. Maybe it's just your mistrust in government entities. Or maybe it was long-range pictures that seem to show too long of a range for a curved Earth. If you didn't know, the current world record for the longest range picture is 443 kilometers. These types of long-range pictures are taken by people who study photography, geometry, refraction, air dryness, ambient light, turbulence, and air particles. Then they combine all this knowledge together to position themselves at the right elevation and the right location to aim for a specific target. So some pictures of long distances do exist, but they have to be very carefully planned out and executed since the spherical shape of our planet makes it very challenging. Now let me ask you this. Isn't it tiresome to hear flat earthers' illogical answers to questions? That their answers keep changing every time the same question is asked? That keep contradicting each other from one question to the next? And that keep bringing up more questions than it answers? This is not just failing every time, it's failing miserably every time. Isn't it annoying to follow a movement where people are totally inconsistent, use science selectively only when they think it's convenient, and are more willing to insult others instead of answering questions and letting the facts speak for themselves? Isn't it exhausting to have to deny almost everything around you all the time? Observations, travel, science, government, and so much more. And isn't it infinitely more likely that either your experiments are faulty, that you're missing information, that you're being fed misinformation, or that random people without enough scientific knowledge just jump too quickly to conclusions, rather than science as a whole getting it wrong after hundreds of years of research, discoveries, documentation, in a whole symphony of fields that all consistently agree with each other for all observations? Ask yourself these questions and feel free to write down your thoughts in the comments. Good luck with the challenge. And for you guys that accept and appreciate scientific facts, if you know any flat earthers, please share this video with them. I'm very curious to see how much of the questions they'll ignore, what kind of weak, nonsensical answers they'll come up with, how many of their answers will contradict themselves, or if it'll help any of them get out of their fantasy world. If you like this video and want more content like this, please like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions about what you'd like to talk about, put it down in the comments below or come follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Links are in the description. Until next time, thanks for watching, and remember, respect your intellect.